Hey, today we're going to talk about explicit return types and why I love them. So here we go. This is real-time editing, right? Remember, I'm doing real-time editing, so I can make that thing show up anytime I want. Okay, so we're going to be looking at three files here: Go, PHP, and TS file, TypeScript, and they're all doing the exact same thing, right? I just want to show you what explicit return types are and why I like them so much, and how they're a little bit different in each language. Okay, so this is TypeScript. It's JavaScript with types, and this is pretty straightforward code if you know how to code. So we have a person that has a first name, last name, and a birth year, which we have as a number here. And then we've got this method called unique ID, which returns a string, and it is calculated like this. And then we create a person named Gary, we get the ID, and we log it out. So if I try and run this thing right here, we get nothing for a really long time. Man, TS knows, I don't know, it takes so long. Anyway, but then we get glime 1982, which is what we would expect. Okay, great. And then I've got the same thing in PHP, and I've got the same thing in Golang as well. Okay, so explicit return type. So if you look right here at this unique ID function, I'm explicitly saying that this is going to return a string. Now, if you know TypeScript, you know that you don't actually have to do that. Okay, so I've now removed that return type. So looking at this code, it's not necessarily super obvious what this thing returns. But TypeScript is really smart, right? So if I go over to my ID here and see what is this ID, it tells me, okay, it's a string. Okay, so with TypeScript, you can have an implicit return type, right? Which in this case, it's a string. Or you can have an explicit return type. Again, it's a string, but now I've written it out. A lot of people say that explicit return types clutter up your code, right? So they think that this looks better. And I used to think that. I thought that for a really long time, but I don't think that anymore. I've changed my mind on this, and I've got a number of reasons. So here are my reasons over here. So the first of all, my editor can help me out. So right now I'm saying it is a string, right? But let's say I get rid of this, right? And I assume that it's going to be returning a string, but I make some kind of mistake like this. Okay, what is it returning now? It is now returning a number. Okay, now you probably figured that out, but the way you figured it out was by compiling the code in your head, right? Now, if I had left my type hint here, or sorry, my return type here, the editor is going to help me out and say, look, I know what you think you're returning, but you're not returning that, right? So I get the editor help right there. So that is also number two. It helps catch errors early, right? So I can see, okay, this is clearly an error. Next thing is it makes code more glanceable. So when I don't have the return type here explicitly, to figure out what this unique ID method is going to return, you have to compile it and run that compilation in your head, and hopefully you get it right. But if I put this in here, you can just glance at it and go, okay, there's a method called unique ID which returns a string, and that's already done for you. Okay, next it shows the author's intent. So maybe the author puts, like string or something like that. And this isn't really so much an issue with TypeScript, but with PHP, it actually is an issue. When I see that it's string there, I go, okay, the person who wrote this code at least thinks they're returning a string. They may not be, but at least they think they are. Now with Golang and TypeScript, you don't really have that issue because the compiler will yell at you. And then lastly, it's useful looking at code outside of an editor. So let's take a look right here. So if we do our git log, okay, and then here's my commit. Let's show that commit. When I'm looking looking at code outside of an editor here, it's really, really nice to be able to say, okay, well, what is this thing? Okay, it returns a string, and I don't have to do the compilation now without syntax highlighting, now without my editor helping me out. So I find it really useful in that situation. Okay, so I've gone on enough about TypeScript, right? So I think I've hopefully convinced you, maybe not, but hopefully I've convinced you why I think that this is useful. Now with Golang, right? Again, exact same program, just, using Go's conventions. You don't get the choice. So, right. So if I remove this return type, explicit return type, it says, wrong result count, no result values expected. So I'm returning something I didn't state I was going to. And so if I save this right now and then try and run it, nothing's going to happen, right? I'm just going to get an error. Okay, so with Go, you don't really get the choice. You have to put them there. That makes me pretty happy, right? I'd be very unhappy if it forced me to not put them there. But now with PHP, this is where things get a little bit weird. So TypeScript has a compiler, transpiler, compiler. Golang obviously has a compiler. PHP, I guess, has a just-in-time compiler or something. But anyway, it doesn't really, right? It's an interpreted language. So with PHP, right, if you look what I have here, I can actually change this to something else. So let's say I change this to bool, right? My editor doesn't get mad at me. Maybe your editor is better than mine. And it actually still runs, right? And what it's done is it's explicit return type in PHP does a conversion. So it goes, oh, you wanted a bool. You're actually returning a string here, but you wanted a bool, so like a Boolean. So I'm going to just convert it for you. Right? And if I put that to string, okay, right. So now that's working in. So a lot of people say, okay, PHP explicit return types are straight trash, right? They're the worst. That's not completely wrong. Like they aren't great, right? I'd much rather it just errored hard. But the nice thing here is, again, I can still see what is the author intending to do here, right? So if somebody said, okay, I'm returning an int, right? So they're returning an integer. And I'm looking at this code, right? And maybe I'm looking at it in Git, right? So I'm looking at this in Git, and I don't have a lot of, access to, like my editor's nice features or anything like that. I can still take a look at it and see like, okay, I think you don't know I think you've got like the wrong thing happening here. Like you don't actually understand what you're returning, right? So even in PHP, where the return type is not strictly enforced, right? Like it is depending on certain objects, right? But it can also actually be coerced. So sometimes it can be even negative, like a negative add, right? I still think it's useful because you are able to like look and see what does the author think is happening here. And so much of writing good code is storytelling, right? So making it really clear how you expect people to interact with the code and what you expect the code to do, right? So yeah, so maybe that was convincing. Maybe it wasn't, but anyway, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching. And yeah, so let me know. Do you use explicit return types? Do you think that they're terrible? If you think they're terrible, you're wrong.